Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Democrats are dug in. 15 days into a government shutdown, Democrats show no sign that they're ready for it to end. Not even the prospect of military families going without a pay. Or Americans in flood their insurance or close on a home in the midst of hurricane season. No, Democrats are dug in. And all those Americans living in uncertainty, well, they're just going to have to wait until Democrats' far-left base is satisfied. Mr. President, Democrats attempt to defend their funding blockade by complaining that Republicans won't negotiate. But what exactly is there to negotiate? Negotiation happens when you have two sides, each with its own demands. Republicans have no demands. We've offered Democrats a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. Democrats, on the other hand, are insisting on $1.5 trillion in new partisan spending in exchange for their votes. Now think about that, Mr. President. Let's put this in perspective. $1.5 trillion in new spending in their proposal to keep the government open for 4 weeks till the end of October. Well, we're already at the middle of October. So basically, they're saying they want $1.5 trillion in taxpayer dollars to keep the government open for the next 2 weeks. Think about that one. As our colleague from Louisiana put it, you need a spreadsheet to keep track of everything they're asking for. The truth is that what Democrats really want is something Republicans can't give them. And that's the approval of their far-left base. They're looking for praise from the likes of MoveOn.org and Indivisible. This weekend, Indivisible is holding rallies around the country. And Democrats' motivations are laid bare by what one of the leaders of that far-left group told CNN last week. He said, and I quote, "I'm telling every elected I talk to, millions will be out cheering you on, or they'll be calling for new leadership." End quote. Cheering you on or calling for new leadership. Mr. President, that's Democrats' motivation. Pleasing their far-left base and preserving their political careers. Meanwhile, we're reading stories about military families lining up at food banks, flight delays because of understaffed airport towers, needy families uncertain about the food assistance they depend upon. But our Democrat colleague from Rhode Island says, and I quote, "For Democrats, it's so far, so good." End quote. So far, so good. I doubt military families and federal workers would agree. If there was ever anything to make it clear that Democrats are in this for their own political advantage, it is callous comments like this one, or the Democrat leader's statement that, and I quote, "every day gets better." End quote, for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, while Democrats may be basking in praise from their far-left base, polls show that most Americans want this shutdown to end. 2/3 of voters think Democrats should reopen the government rather than hold out for their partisan demands. And if just 5 more Democrats would show some courage, we could do just that. We need 5 more Democrats to say enough is enough, to put the American people ahead of the far left, and to support this clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution sitting right there at the Senate desk, ready to be picked up and passed today, put on the President's desk, signed into law, and the government reopens. If just 5 more Democrats would show some courage, we could do just that. So, Mr. President, 5 more votes, this bill could be on its way to the White House. As I said, President Trump stands ready to sign it. It is clean. It is nonpartisan. It has no policy writers, no partisan gimmicks. It simply funds the government for a foreseeable time to November the 21st to give us an opportunity to finish the appropriations process under regular order and to deal with the funding of the government in the way that it should be funded, in an open, transparent process that uses the committees under regular order, the Appropriations Committee, subcommittees, the floor, open to amendments. Again, I know that's a novel concept. That's a novel concept compared to the way the Democrats did it when they had the majority. Even though the Appropriations Committee did its work last year, 11 of the 12 appropriations bills were reported out, not a single one was brought to the floor of the Senate. Because they like to negotiate behind closed doors with a handful of people deciding on behalf of everybody else. That is not the way this place ought to work, Mr. President. Troops need to get paid. Families need to get the help they need. All this uncertainty for the American people needs to go away. And we can get back to work on the things that really matter. But the question is, are Democrats interested in that? Or are they more interested in being cheered by far-left groups at Saturday's rally? Well, I guess we'll see soon enough. Will today be day 15 of Democrat shutdown? We'll have another opportunity later today to vote on that bill sitting right at the desk. 5 more Democrats, it passes. It goes to the White House, gets signed into law by the President, and the government opens up. Will today be day 15 of Democrat shutdown? Or will it be the day we reopen the government and get back to the business of serving the American people? Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's now been over 2 weeks since Republicans shut the government down because they refused to work with Democrats in a serious way to fix the health care crisis looming over the American people. Open enrollment starts in just 2 weeks, and Americans will be forced to choose health care plans that will send costs skyrocketing. As we speak, families are receiving letters for their new health insurance rates. And more states are opening their window shopping period for what health insurance will look like next year. With open enrollment around the corner, Republicans cannot continue to kick this can down the road. It's happening now. The health care crisis is now. The public agrees, Democrats agree, the White House privately admits it. Even some Republicans in Congress know it's the truth. And yet Republican leaders, especially Speaker Johnson, continue to dig in. The Speaker has now kept the House Republicans on vacation for 3 weeks, as if they can make the issue go away by letting House Republicans hide. Well, the American people don't have time for Republican inaction. This morning, let me show my Republican colleagues precisely what will happen if they continue to insist on no negotiation. Let's take a look at this chart. These are real numbers. These are the actual numbers for New York's healthcare exchange for the average couple in Plattsburgh, New York. This is in the heart of New York's rural North Country, and it's Congresswoman Elise Stefanik's district. Right now, with the ACA tax credits, this health care plan, a bronze plan, is $282 a month. That's still a lot for a family, a working family. It's a lot of money. It ends up, coming close to $4,000, $3,500 a year. But that's nothing compared to what will happen if these credits expire. If the tax credits expire, the same health care plan will go up to nearly $1,700 a month next year. $1,700. $1,400 extra every single month, a 495% increase. For the average family or small business owner or farmer in upstate rural New York, an extra $1,400 a month on health care is financial ruin. That's $15,000 a year. How are people, even people making decent money, going to afford that? And this is not just true of New York. This is similar to what's happening in all the states around the country. And every day now, people are getting notices. And we're getting close to November 1st, where people are going to have to decide, do they give up health insurance altogether and watch their people, their children, their spouses suffer? So I say to my Republican colleagues, especially in the House, you can't hide from your constituents forever. The American people expect Congress to fix this health care crisis, because otherwise people will go bankrupt, people will get sick, people will lose insurance, people will fail to get the care they need, and more people will needlessly die. Republicans know this, and yet neither the Trump administration nor Republicans in Congress are even pretending to try and solve the health care crisis. Democrats are ready and willing to negotiate with Republicans. We want to work in a serious way to reopen the government and spare tens of millions of Americans the threat of financial ruin. Financial ruin, $15,000 more or even more a year. On RIFs, Mr. President, last week the Trump administration vindictively fired thousands of federal workers in a mistaken attempt to try and hurt the Democrats in this shutdown. Let's be very clear. Nobody forced the administration to do these firings. They did it because they wanted to, period. They did it on their own. This decision, which they made, Trump made and his administration made, vote, was so callous, so unnecessary, so deeply hurtful to hardworking Americans, and yesterday we learned it's even worse than they thought. Yesterday we learned the administration admitted in court that nearly 800 employees at HHS were laid off in error. Not only are they mean and vicious and uncaring, they're incompetent. It's despicable. How careless, how incompetent is this administration? How cruel are they that they'll throw away people's livelihoods like this with sort of the flick of a pen without even examining what's happening? These accidental firings show you how stupid it is for Russell Vought to treat federal workers as political pawns. It's destructive, it's cruel, it's vicious, and it will backfire in the eyes of the public. That's why even Republicans should reverse every single and should stop playing politics with people's livelihoods and their lives. They should instead get serious about negotiation with Congress to end this shutdown at once. And finally, on the young Republicans, Mr. President, it's a frightening time in America as we witness the rise of political violence and violent rhetoric. Yesterday, as Politico published a story about thousands of text exchanges reported from prominent members of the young Republican organization across the country, showing racist, sexist, outright violent language. This wasn't a casual mention. This happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times from a group called the Young Republican Organization. They made jokes about Hitler, about gas chambers. They talked about torture. They made jokes about sexual assault. They used almost every racist obscenity, including the N-word. Now, no matter who it comes from, right or left, all of us have an obligation to denounce vile rhetoric like this. But a full day after these texts have leaked, most Republican leaders haven't said a peep about these gas chamber and Hitler jokes coming from the young Republicans. Too many Republicans seem willing to call out violent rhetoric only when it comes from the other side. But these same Republicans never seem willing to denounce it when it comes from their own ranks. And that's dangerous. Violent political rhetoric is an attack on everyone. And Vice President Vance yesterday, amazingly, seemed to excuse these vile texts as just a college group chat and refused to join the pearl clutching. That is outrageous. Leave it to J.D. Vance to preach about violent political rhetoric only when it serves his interests, and then ignore or excuse it when it comes from his own side. The hypocrisy is disgusting and shameful coming from supposed national leaders. If you don't like hate speech, you don't like all hate speech, not just hate speech from political groups you don't like. The real test is to denounce it from groups that might be on your side of the aisle, young Republican organization. And let's be clear, these aren't random college kids. These are individuals who work in government, who've held positions of leadership at the state level, and one person in the chat is actually an elected official. Of course, some Republicans at the lower level have spoken out, and good for them, they should do so. But where's everyone else? Where are all our Republican colleagues? Where's President Trump? Here's what needs to happen. Every single Republican leader from the president on down has to condemn these attacks immediately, or all their cries about hate speech seem to be one-sided or bogus. The people who made these vile comments should be out of a job and never allowed to work in politics again. And both sides must make it clear to the entire country that vile rhetoric like this is unacceptable. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today is day 15th of the Schumer shutdown. Here we are, over 2 weeks into this, and the Democrats continue to play a dangerous game. The Schumer shutdown continues to put lives at risk, and it's doing it each and every day. Every day an airplane takes off and lands, there is increased risk because of the Schumer shutdown. Thousands of air traffic controllers across the country keep us safe. Right now they're working, but they're not getting paid. Yesterday they received a partial paycheck, and it was their final paycheck until Democrats end the Schumer shutdown. And it's not just air traffic controllers, Mr. President. It's TSA agents, it's Border Patrol agents, it's ICE agents, it's FBI agents. They've also received their final paycheck. These are the people that we expect to make life and death decisions, and they shouldn't be distracted by financial matters that are affecting them as a result of the actions by the Democrats in this body. As of today, there is one bank that I want to refer to that serves members of the military. They serve federal workers, they serve their families, and they say during the Schumer shutdown, 70,000 members have come asking for loans. That's 70,000 families of military and federal workers who need extra help to make ends meet because Democrats have blocked their paychecks. A recent headline from the Wall Street Journal reads, quote, furloughed federal workers turn to side hustles to survive. People with full-time government jobs are desperate for the income that's necessary because their regular paychecks are being withheld by the Democrats. These are workers who are struggling to make ends meet, and they're not going to see another dime until Schumer and the Democrats end this shutdown. These people, when they go to work, the life or death decisions need clear heads, clear minds to do their jobs. They shouldn't have to worry about the distractions of putting food on the table, keeping the lights on because the government is shut down. They shouldn't be the distractions. They should be focused on their job when they're at work, not having to be worried about what's going on at home because the paychecks haven't come because the Democrats have stopped the flow of their paycheck. One air traffic controller was very blunt about this, Mr. President, and the consequences of the Schumer shutdown. He said, quote, the financial anxiety doesn't just hurt morale, it directly affects safety. This is an air traffic controller. He said sometimes that small moment where your mind is elsewhere can have serious impacts. That's what we're dealing with today. This is the seriousness that the nation is facing while the Democrats and Chuck Schumer play political games. And it's a dangerous game. Let me tell you what's going on at airports across the country because air traffic controllers aren't getting paid thanks to Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. In Burbank, California, the air traffic control tower was unmanned for 6 hours. Flights were grounded. In Nashville, similarly, hundreds of flights were delayed in a day because the air traffic control tower went dark. In Charlotte, nearly 2,000 flights have been delayed since the start of the Schumer shutdown. Airport after airport. In Atlanta, the nation's busiest airport, air traffic controller staffing challenges and delays are mounting with each passing day. More than 53,000 flights, Mr. President, have been delayed nationwide because of the Schumer shutdown. Most air traffic controllers live paycheck to paycheck, as do most Americans. Senate Democrats expect them to work for free. Why? Because the minority leader says, every day, he says, gets better for us. The Democrats say every day gets better for them. Better for whom? Not better for the American people whose lives are put in danger as a result of what the Democrats are doing here despite the needs of the nation. CNN recently published a shocking quote from a Democrat staff member. Maybe it's a member who's sitting on the floor right now in the United States Senate. A Democrat staff member said this, published by the CNN. staff member, a Democrat, said that the Democrats aren't going to change course with the Schumer shutdown strategy until planes are falling out of the sky. That's the approach of the Democrat staff to the Democrat Senate, that they're not going to end the shutdown until there are planes falling out of the sky. Mr. President, is that what we are at now because of what the Democrats are doing to this country? Shutdown doesn't end until planes are falling out of the sky. Mr. President, today's Democrat Party has completely surrendered to the radical left. They've abandoned the American workers, the American people, American families. Those workers and families want to keep America safe. The safety of the American people now becomes a punchline for the Democrat Party in this nation. The far left is controlling today's Democrat Party, make no doubt about it. These people are radical, extreme, dangerous, and scary, and they're coming to Washington this weekend. And they've told us how dangerous they are by admitting that their shutdown strategy will not change until planes are falling out of the sky. Innocent people are collateral damage in this dangerous political game that the Democrats are playing. Democrats will have their 9th opportunity today to reopen the government. They'll have their 9th opportunity to bipartisan, clean continuing resolution. A clean continuing resolution that they voted in favor of 13 times when Joe Biden was president. Democrats are going to have their 9th opportunity to pay the brave men and women who keep our skies clear and who keep our borders secure and keep our communities safe. Democrats have an obligation, Mr. President, to reopen the government, and they need to do it before there are planes falling out of the sky. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Beautiful. The Republican Party controls the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And despite that trifecta, the government has been shut down for 15 long days and counting. As an American sufferer, Majority Leader Thune and Speaker Mike Johnson insist that congressional Republicans will address expiring Affordable Care Act health insurance premium tax credits after the government reopens. But do the American people have any reason to believe that congressional Republicans really are going to work to help save health care for millions of Americans? Now, if you look at the record, in the past 8 months, Democrats have repeatedly tried to extend these ACA premium tax credits. What does it boil down to? Other credits for many families who have health insurance policy. The Republicans and the blue budget, whatever they called it, basically eliminating these tax credits, which means the burden will fall on these families without any help in the tax code in a matter of weeks. To protect these tax credits. Republicans voted against it, and the amendment failed. In April, Senator Shaheen went again and offered another amendment to the second budget resolution, doing exactly the same things. Once again, the Republicans had a chance to correct the error they made in this big, beautiful budget, but they voted against it. In June, Senator Jon Ossoff of Georgia offered an amendment to the Republicans' One Big Beautiful bill to save the enhanced premium tax credit a third time. You know what happened. You could guess it. Every Senate Republican voted against the amendment. It failed. And let us not forget that for the past 15 years, the American people have been waiting for the Republican Party's Affordable Care Act replacement plan. In Donald Trump's first term, he made an attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He wouldn't describe to the American people what he was going to replace it with, but he was damn determined to get it repealed. It led to a moment I'll never forget on the floor of the Senate. It was about 2 or 3 in the morning. All the members were in their seats. And it came down to one person as to whether or not the Affordable Care Act would be repealed under the Trump administration in his first term. It was a moment of high drama because we knew what was at stake. Millions of American families, without the help of the Affordable Care Act, couldn't buy or afford health insurance. So it came down to the vote of John McCain, former senator, Republican from Arizona. He went through those doors to my right and was gone for a few minutes, and people said, he's talking to President Trump. Trump's trying to convince him to put an end to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, once and for all. John McCain was his own man. He wasn't a creature of membership in an organization. He voted his conscience. He walked through that door, a hush fell all over the chamber. He stood in the well right on that corner of that table and lifted his right arm as far as he could. You remember his arm was broken many times when he was a prisoner of war, and came down hard with a no. And with that single vote, John McCain saved the Affordable Care Act for millions of Americans and gave them health insurance they could afford for their families. The Republicans had failed again to put an end to the Affordable Care Act. Well, here they are doing the same thing with the big, beautiful budget bill. Premiums. Each state insurance industry is going to announce the new premiums for the new calendar year, which starts in just a few weeks. Our date in Illinois is October 27th. 12 days from today, those who are part of healthcare.gov, those who are part of the Affordable Care Act, will find out what happens to their premiums. If history is any indicator, it shows that my Republican colleagues have no plan. They didn't have one in Trump's first term. They certainly don't have one now. The president said when he was asked point blank, what's your plan to replace Obamacare? He had concepts of a plan in his mind, nothing in writing, to make health care more affordable for the American people. So it's a bit over the top for the Republicans to ask Democrats and the American people to wait and trust them to fix this issue, to let the premiums go up, and then maybe they'll get around to changing the law. That is what this is all about. There are a lot of things, words used on the floor of the Senate to describe the government shutdown. I'm sorry it's reached this point, but I think there's a reason for it, and it's a good one. We believe that 20 million American families will see the cost of health insurance go up because of the Trump budget and reach a point where it's not affordable for many families to have health insurance. How about that? What about your family? If you're a person who has health insurance, children, perhaps someone in your family with a serious illness, you understand the value of health insurance and you understand your vulnerability. One broken bone, one automobile accident, one bad diagnosis, and you're going to end up with a bill you cannot pay. It'll exhaust your savings. That's the reality of the cost of health insurance. But my Republican colleagues, like the one who just spoke, don't seem to understand that, and I think he should. What's at stake here is not a political cussing match. What's at stake here is a decision by this body to help millions of American families. If Republicans in Congress fail to extend the enhanced premium tax credits before the end of this year, and that's just a few weeks away, premiums for 22 million Americans will double. Take a look at what you're paying each month for health insurance for your family. Multiply times 2, and that's the result of the big, beautiful bill that was passed by the Republicans. Let me give you an example. In Illinois, a 60-year-old couple with an income of $82,000 could see their annual premiums increase $17,000 a year if the enhanced premium tax credits are not extended. That's an increase of $1,400 a month. Ask any family, working family, whether paying $1,400 a month more for health insurance will have an impact on the family budget. You know the answer. Now compare the additional cost to the tax cuts that some billionaires will enjoy because of the so-called Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by the Republicans. Billionaires will receive a tax cut of more than $310,000 a year. I am sure Elon Musk needs that money. $25,000 a month in tax breaks. So contrast those two numbers. An increase in health insurance premiums of $1,400 a month because of the Republicans' vote, and an increase in the tax breaks, the reduction of taxes for billionaires in America of $25,000 a month. That includes more than 100,000 people in my home state of Illinois who will be forced to make the impossible decision that most Americans pray that they'll never have to make, like whether to purchase groceries or insulin, or whether to pay the mortgage or take the kids in for that checkup. Don't take my word for it. Listen to what my constituents have written to me. Stephanie from Evanston, Illinois, is a business owner, and many business owners count on healthcare.gov for their health insurance. Stephanie told me that if her enhanced ACA tax credits are allowed to expire, the result of the big beautiful bill, the Trump budget, it would, quote, cripple her budget, and that she's, quote, not sure she could cover the doubling of this cost. Most people wouldn't be able to. She asked me how our country claims to support business owners if they can't afford to take care of their family health. More than 4 million other small business owners who get their health coverage through the Affordable Care Act are asking the same question. Take Jennifer. She's a mother and a small business owner from Illinois who told me her costs have skyrocketed under this president. She told me her food costs are up and, quote, utilities are up, gas is expensive, and the cost of supplies for my business have tripled. Now, Jennifer is concerned that her ACA premiums will double next year unless we do something. That is what the shutdown is all about. It is not some source of pride for politicians to argue back and forth. There's a purpose in this debate. The purpose is to make sure that we come to the rescue of tens of millions of Americans who face the doubling of their health insurance premiums. Jennifer's concerned that her ACA premiums will double, as I mentioned, next year. If that happens, she would have, quote, no choice but to pass those costs on to my customers or to close my doors. As you know, Mr. President, small businesses employ almost 50% of private sector workers. They are the engine of our economy. If our nation's small businesses start closing, there'll be a ripple effect throughout our local economy. And it will happen in part because Republicans in Congress refuse to lower health care costs. I like John Thune. He's the Republican leader here in the Senate. We've known one another for years. We have our differences politically, but I think he's basically a good person. And I've heard him come to the floor over and over again saying, pass this clean, continuing resolution, open the government, and by golly, we're going to sit down and talk to you about health insurance. Why can't we do that now? Why can't we do it this morning? There are enough tables in this building for people to gather. Now that the House of Representatives is back in town, they can participate as well. We need the president at the table as well, as far as I'm concerned. There are many Republicans who will basically wait for a signal from the president to agree to anything. He should be at the table. He brought in the ceasefire into the Middle East. Let's see if he can bring a ceasefire to the Senate and House. It's past time to address this issue. Insurance companies are making their final decisions about monthly premium costs for next year right now. They've sent out notifications, and people will soon be picking their health care plans based on these costs. As I mentioned, October 27th is a target date for this announcement in Illinois. I guarantee you, if we don't bring some relief to these families, we're going to see premiums increase dramatically. That is what this government shutdown is all about. We want to sit down and deal with health care costs directly and now. Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson seem to have made the political calculation. When it comes to tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, they have no problem moving fast and breaking things. But when it comes to health care for more than 20 million Americans, that can wait. My constituents, like Stephanie and Jennifer and their families, can't wait any longer. It's time to get this done. And one last point, Mr. President. I'm from downstate Illinois. I live in Springfield, 200 miles south of Chicago. I am honored to represent the city of Chicago, and I basically do my best to represent the entire state. We have problems downstate because of these healthcare costs as well. Nearly 400,000 Illinoisans currently receive the ACA tax credits, which are at risk of disappearing because of the Republican vote. If the tax credits are not extended, eligible enrollees will pay an average of $1,032 more per year in Illinois for their health care coverage, $1,700 more per year in rural areas. Small town, rural Illinois is going to feel this as well. These increases will be higher for families. A 60-year-old couple earning $82,000 a year would see an annual increase of $17,000, $1,400 a month. A family of four earning $64,000 a year in downstate Illinois would see an annual premium increase of 226%, $2,571. Counties that will be hardest hit financially are conservative, Republican-dominated counties by and large. Hamilton County will see an increase of $2,772 a year. White County, $2,496 more a year. And Union County, $2,400 more a year. Counties with the highest number of enrollees impacted: Cook County, our largest, $170,500. DuPage County, $35,900. And Lake County, $23,200. We estimate that we will lose up to 9 hospitals in downstate Illinois because of changes in Medicaid and because of these increases in health insurance premiums. Is that a concern? It is to me. I've represented these downstate counties for many years, and I know what it means to lose a hospital. I know what it means to add 45 minutes to an hour to your drive time for the delivery of that baby or critical traumatic care. It really makes the difference between life and death. That's worth fighting for. Before the sun sets today, let us hope that at some table here in the United States Capitol, the leaders of Congress will meet and the President will promise to join them in an effort to get this solved. There's no reason we can't do it. We hear from the Republicans they want to make some changes. Let's make those changes now and make sure that we get this done quickly. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Here in Congress, since congressional Democrats shut down the federal government. And let's call it what it is. It is the Schumer shutdown. In that period, we have voted 8 times on a clean continuing resolution. It is straightforward. It is a short-term bill that funds government at current levels without adding any kind of partisan policies to it. This would give us, here in Congress, time to finish the full-year funding bills responsibly. Instead, Democrats pushed for over $1 trillion in new spending to recklessly eliminate the $50 billion Rural Hospital Stabilization Fund. Why in the world would Democrats want to do that? Why would they want to eliminate this crucial fund for our nation's rural hospitals? It is unthinkable. The fact is, the Democrats' so-called proposal to reopen the government is packed with unrelated items. This includes the COVID-era bonus payments, overseas climate resilience projects, and taxpayer-funded health care for non-citizens. That's not responsible governing, and it is not fair to American families. House Republicans passed, and they sent to the Senate, a clean CR. That means that it has no poison pills, no policy writers on it. Democrats rejected it 8 times, and it is now time, folks, for Senator Schumer and his caucus to drop this partisan wish list and do their jobs. Meanwhile, it was reported in Punch Bowl News on October 9th that Chuck Schumer said, "Every day gets better for us." And by us, he means the Democrat Party. If the Democrats think it's better that our troops aren't paid and that it's better when people are worried about being furloughed, then that just shows their arrogance. That just shows they are tone deaf to the uncertainty and the stress people are feeling. That just shows Chuck Schumer is in his Schumer shutdown only for political theater. This shutdown is hurting people. Farmers are losing access to federal support at a time when the ag economy is already strained. Construction projects that rely on federal funding are stalling. Air traffic controllers and federal employees face uncertainty about their paychecks. None of this is necessary. Let's be clear. A short-term funding bill is not the place for sweeping policy changes. If this continues, deeper cuts to essential services may follow, and that is entirely preventable. Remember, the House sent us a clean CR with no new policies included. It simply continues current funding until November 21st. Then we will take up appropriations bills that have strong bipartisan support. And they have that because it was already negotiated within that appropriations committee. And as a member of that committee, we passed it out of the committee. I am deeply committed to that transparent process, one where senators debate, amend, and vote on each bill individually before the end of the fiscal year. All we are asking is to reopen the government so that we can continue that funding process. Leader Thune promised that we would take appropriations bills up here on the floor, and we've already passed 3 of them. Let's show the American people bipartisanship and transparency and continue this important work. So why are we here today and still shut down? Because the Democrats are more focused on appeasing the far left than funding the government. I believe they are caving to political pressure when they should be fulfilling their most basic duty, keeping the government open and operating for their constituents. Republicans' goal is simple: reopen the government now, protect our military and families, and return to regular order. At the end of the day, Americans deserve a functioning government, not political theater. If just a handful of Senate Democrats join Republicans, we can end this shutdown. And I hope when we next vote to reopen the government, my Democrat colleagues will join us in doing the right thing. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I rise today to highlight a growing crisis that threatens our farmers, rural communities, food security, and our national economy. I'm concerned that American agriculture and rural communities face very hard times. Many Americans are unaware of the stakes ahead. Here's the bottom line. American agriculture is in serious trouble, and Congress must act now with short-term assistance. That is not hyperbole. I continue to hear from producers in Mississippi and across the country that the numbers don't add up and the outlook is grim. Without immediate action, we risk losing not only farms, but also the rural communities and the food security they provide. This is no longer a warning, it's an emergency. Over the past 3 crop years, rising input costs for seed, fertilizer, fuel, labor, and more have collided with falling commodity prices and high interest rates. Even with strong crop yields this year, many farmers are facing losing between $100 and $400 per acre. For a 2,000-acre farm, that's a financial hit in the hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars in losses. Farm bankruptcies have already surpassed last year's total, and if we do not step in, that trend will accelerate. The ripple effect is real. In small towns across America, family farms are the economic engine. When farms thrive, so do local grocery stores, schools, equipment dealers, banks, and churches. When farms fail, the community fails with them. Jobs disappear, families leave, Main Street goes silent. We've seen this before. In the 1980s, a generation of farmers were nearly wiped out by high interest rates, collapsing markets, and inadequate safety nets. Today's producers are starting to feel those same pressures. Bankers, economists, and lenders are sounding the alarm again. While we may differ on policy, we must agree on the urgent need to act while we still have time to do that. The significant updates we secured in the reconciliation process this summer will strengthen the farm safety net, and I am proud of that progress. But those changes won't take effect until next fall. That's too late for many farmers already on the brink. We need short-term assistance now to help producers survive the coming crop year. Let me be crystal clear. Farmers do not want a handout. They want a fair shot. Food security is national security. We cannot afford to lose a generation of American farmers or become dependent on foreign countries to feed and clothe us. That is a risk that we cannot take. Over the long term, we know American agriculture will be stronger if we secure fair trade deals and build stable markets at home and abroad. Our competitors, China, Argentina, Brazil, and others, are moving aggressively. I believe that if we don't act quickly, we'll lose vital export opportunities and long-term stability for our producers. In this world of global competition, we must revive American-grown cotton to be the center of our supply chains, providing reliable markets for our producers and bolstering industries that depend on cotton. I introduced the Buying American Cotton Act to help us get there by incentivizing U.S. retailers to produce, purchase, and manufacture American cotton here at home. This legislation would help secure a resilient, self-reliant, and prosperous cotton industry for the future by reinforcing our supply chain, from farm to textile to market, and by reducing our reliance on cotton produced under forced labor practices and environmental destruction. I call on this body to consider this legislation as we seek long-term solutions to the problems that beset American farmers today. I'm encouraged by the bipartisan work underway to complete a 5-year reauthorization of the Farm Bill, which is long overdue. Last winter, we secured farm support funding, which was a lifeline for many of our farmers this crop year, but the crisis hasn't passed. Farmers are still facing impossible choices about whether they can afford to plant next year or even to stay in business at all. I fully support ongoing work to provide additional federal bridge funding before the end of the year to ensure more of our family farms can stay in business. We all represent different sectors of American agriculture, but the crisis does not discriminate. It spans commodities, regions, and party lines. What matters now is that we come together with urgency and with purpose. Our farmers are counting on us. It's time for Congress to meet the moment before it's too late. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
like 20 living. Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
President, are we in a quorum call?
We're not.
After more than 2 years of bloodshed, 20 living hostages and the remains of at least 7 deceased hostages were recently returned to their families in Israel by Hamas. Videos of the tearful reunions circulating on social media show the immense joy and relief felt by the families who have been suffering through the unthinkable, and wondering if they will ever see their loved ones again. Behind all this extraordinary story is the leadership of President Trump in negotiating an end to this war that's lasted 2 years. President Trump has rightly gained praise from some of the most unexpected critics like Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. All of these people are correctly acknowledging what supporters of President Trump have known for a long time. He is truly a master of the art of the deal. I can't think of a single president who, through a combination of carrots and sticks, could have accomplished something like this before, but President Trump has, and he deserves the credit. But of course, for this conflict to be truly over, each and every one of the conditions laid out in President Trump's 20-point peace deal must be implemented by both sides. And that's where the trouble really begins. We cannot allow a terrorist organization like Hamas to pull the wool over our eyes or to act like this is any normal sort of negotiation between two parties acting in good faith. Hamas must keep up its end of the bargain on this and other terms for the deal to actually work. We've already seen how Hamas has violated the peace agreement, as they have not yet returned the remaining bodies of 20 additional hostages who are presumed dead, including 2 American citizens, so that their families can properly grieve and bury their loved ones. Yesterday, Hamas, despite this peace deal, violently sought to reassert its control over Gaza from rival Palestinian groups. This included Hamas dragging several men from their families and executing them in broad daylight. Hamas has been rightfully described as a death cult. Their blatant regard for human life is the reason the Palestinian people have undergone so much suffering over the last 2 years in Gaza. I know some would like to blame Israel and the Israeli Defense Force and Prime Minister Netanyahu, but the reason for the humanitarian disaster that has been Gaza for the last 2 years is because of Hamas. If they hadn't executed 1,200 or so Israeli citizens on October the 7th, 2 years ago, none of this would have occurred. Of course, establishing an agreement that depends on the goodwill of Hamas is going to be an enormous challenge. And it can't be a matter of faith that they will act as any negotiating partner in good faith would be presumed to act. Over the last 24 hours, the importance of establishing a multinational security force in Gaza to replace Hamas has become increasingly clear. Hamas cannot remain in control if we are to have peace. But the return of the 20 living hostages is no small feat, and it's something to be celebrated. And if President Trump is successful in ultimately bringing a lasting peace to the region, it will be one of the most significant diplomatic and foreign policy accomplishments in memory. Mr. President, on another matter, it's now been 15 days since Senate Democrats have shut down the federal government. They did that by blocking a short-term spending provision that would have taken us up until November the 21st. In other words, roughly 9 weeks from the beginning of the continuing resolution. Republicans have given Democrats multiple opportunities to end this mess by holding a number of votes on the House-passed continuing resolution. As the Majority Leader, Senator Thune, has pointed out numerous times, we're not asking for any major policy changes. All we're asking is to keep the lights on and to keep federal government employees paid during this period of time while we work out longer-term appropriations bills by the November the 21st deadline. But every single time we've given Democrats opportunity to do the right thing, only 3 of them have voted to reopen the government. You know, talking to my constituents back home, it's hard to explain what's going on here. They understand the stupidity of a government shutdown. Experience has shown that the same problems that cause a shutdown in the first place are there staring you in the face when the government is reopened. So it accomplishes nothing except maybe as performance art. And if you think about it, that's really what this is. Our Democratic colleagues are afraid to act in a reasonable and logical manner and keep the government open while we negotiate longer-term appropriations bills and take up the issue of health care subsidies that expire at the end of this calendar year. In a normal world, that's what we would be doing now, but we can't do any of that during the government shutdown. Federal employees are now beginning to miss their paychecks, which will have consequences that reverberate throughout the country. 1 in 6 Americans lives paycheck to paycheck. So it may not be a big deal to wealthy senators on the Democratic side who don't have to worry about paying the bills paycheck to paycheck, but it does matter to many, many Americans, because it means they may not be able to pay their rent. They may not be able to buy groceries for their family or pay their utility bills because they're not receiving a paycheck. Some people may be thinking, well, it's only government employees that are going to be affected, and everybody knows the federal government's big and bloated and could stand a diet. But it's not simply the case that these government employees will be the only ones affected. There are going to be a number of downstream effects of this Democrat-induced shutdown that have consequences for everybody. First of all, I have to tell you, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that the greatest country in the world and the people who are elected to represent 330 million Americans can't get their act together and can't figure this out. It is beyond dumb. It makes no sense at all, except as a matter of self-serving political gesturing and the sort of performance art that I mentioned a moment ago, trying to demonstrate to your political base, yeah, we're fighting. Well, this isn't fighting. Fighting is keeping the government open, having debates, having votes, trying to persuade people to your point of view. That's what political fighting is. It's not taking your ball and going home. One issue affecting the whole country, federal workers and private sector employees alike, is the way this shutdown is disturbing airplane flights. My flight coming back from Austin this past weekend was delayed by such a disruption. Wasn't that big a deal to me, obviously, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who's experienced this, and more importantly than the fact that senators are experiencing, our constituents, the people we represent, the people we owe our jobs to. They're the ones that are suffering inconvenience. Transportation security agents and air traffic controllers are among the federal workers deemed essential during a government shutdown, which means they have to work, but they're not being paid. And that's a pretty difficult situation for many of these folks to be in. As I said, some of them can't afford child care, to buy groceries, to pay the rent, to pay utilities. This is a true hardship for many of these Americans. This has resulted in many of these essential employees calling in sick in order to pick up shift work to make ends meet. Additionally, those who are showing up are having to work under increased stress, longer hours, and short-staffed working environment. On top of this, they are carrying the burden of unknowing when they're ever going to get paid. Now, we know that under the law, these employees will eventually be reimbursed for their missed salary, but that doesn't do a lot to put food on the table right now, or pay the rent, or to pay utility bills now. As the president of the National Air Traffic Controllers put it, it is completely unfair that an air traffic controller, the one who makes sure our airline flights, it's completely unfair that an air traffic controller is the one that holds the burden of see how long you can hang in there in order to allow this political process to work out. The president of a local chapter, the American Federation of Government Employees in Dallas, Fort Worth, said regarding the shutdown, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions coming from the field. They don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know how long it's going to last either. But the problem is that it only gets worse the longer this shutdown goes on. Just in terms of airline flights, we've seen hundreds canceled since the shutdown began, and thousands more have been delayed, which means more and more Americans' daily routines are being upended as a result of this irrational and truly stupid government shutdown. 3 airports in Texas are seeing some of the worst delays. Last Tuesday, both the George W. Bush Intercontinental Airport and Hobby Airport in Houston were at risk of ground stops because of staffing shortages. Love Field in Dallas was also experiencing delays. But this isn't just affecting the state of Texas. Airports around the country are experiencing delays in order to avoid dangerous potential air flights and ground activity associated with short staffing. The Federal Aviation Administration is also reporting staffing problems in Boston, Nashville, Chicago, and Philadelphia, as well as Burbank, California, Newark, New Jersey, and Denver, Colorado. Some analysts have speculated that the disruptions could continue to cause problems during the upcoming travel holiday, Thanksgiving, and into Christmas. For many of us here in the Senate, it has become an unwelcome tradition each year to have our Thanksgiving and Christmas celebrations with our families upset in order to perform our responsibilities. That doesn't just affect members of the Senate and the House, but also the able staff that make our work possible. Of course, what this tradition is really a sign of dysfunction. It's embarrassing. It should be embarrassing. If we did our jobs properly and passed our appropriations bills on time, we would not have to impose the burdens of all this on other people, our constituents and our staff. It is really not rational that Senate Democrats should impose this burden on the entire country in order to try to appease the more radical elements of their political base, which is really what this is all about. They're afraid to agree to something reasonable and rational and short term because they know that they're likely to be criticized by their political base, the more radical elements in the Democratic base. Well, don't take my word for it. Minority Leader Schumer has made it clear that he is willing to impose almost any cost on ordinary Americans in order to try to appease his radical progressive base. In one of the more telling quotes, he admitted to Punchbowl News last week that this was all about politics when he said, quote, "Every day gets better for us." Really? Well, by us, he doesn't mean the American people. He must mean people like him who are afraid to say no to their radical base in order to perform the most basic functions of government. Plus the fact it's not true. Is every day really getting better? Or is it more and more embarrassing? Is it having more and more of a ripple effect on people who are innocent of any wrongdoing? They just happen to be affected. I think if the Democratic leader were to ask the Transportation Security Administration workers who are working overtime without pay, or the air traffic controllers who are wondering when, if ever, they will receive their next paycheck, who are also working without pay, or the mothers and fathers, the federal employees, who are wondering if they're able to enjoy the holidays with their children and their extended families because of travel disruption, or maybe just because financially they won't be able to make ends meet. But the truth is that Senate Democrats care less about federal workers and the rest of the country than they do about appeasing their radical base. Senator Schumer has made it clear that it was his plan all along to make the American people pay the price in order to achieve his political goals when he said, quote, "We've thought about this long in advance." So this wasn't an accident. This wasn't sort of a surprising occurrence. This was planned all along by Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, which makes it all that much more egregious. Well, I sincerely hope, for the sake of Texans and Americans all across the country, that Senate Democrats will have a change of heart. I hope that someday soon, maybe today, Senate Democrats will set aside the demands of their radical base and simply vote to put an end to this ridiculous government shutdown that serves no one's interest except perhaps their own narrow political interests. We need to pass that short-term continuing resolution that will only take us to November the 21st. And then I imagine we're going to have this discussion all over again, which is just further evidence of the dysfunction here in the Senate and in the Congress these days, mainly because our Senate Democrats and House Democrats are so opposed to President Trump and his policies. And they feel like they need to be shown to fight and to push back against President Trump. But they're not hurting President Trump. He's doing just fine. He's making incredible peace deals in the Middle East and hopefully other places around the world like Ukraine. What they're doing is hurting their own constituents, and they're causing people to doubt whether their government can actually function the way it's supposed to. So I hope, given the opportunity to vote here shortly on another short-term continuing resolution, a stopgap spending bill that will only take us to November the 21st, that we get 5 more Democrats join the 3 who've already voted to reopen the government so that we can put an end to this foolishness. Because every day does not get better for the American people, even if it gets better politically to save Senator Schumer's skin. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Last, our friends in Israel have won the war by defeating the depraved Hamas savages that launched the heinous, unprovoked attack from Gaza on October 7th. After the most devastating assault on Jews since the Holocaust, which was followed by 2 years of fighting, suffering, and death, the living hostages are home, and a new day has dawned in the Middle East. Earlier this week, I joined my fellow Arkansans in rejoicing and thanking God for answering our prayers and bringing those hostages home to their families. At the same time we celebrate their reunions, though, we also pledge that we will never forget the innocent deceased victims of Hamas's atrocities, many of whom have not yet been properly laid to rest. We will work to secure their remains and honor their memory through our commitment to a lasting and enduring peace in the Middle East. When terrorists attacked, raped, maimed, and killed innocent Israelis and Americans and citizens of other nations on October 7th, the Middle East was forever changed, but not in the way Hamas intended. Instead of pressuring Israel to surrender, President Trump rejected the Obama-Biden policy of appeasement and weakness, and we backed Israel to the hilt. Because of President Trump's unrelenting pressure on Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu's decisive military action, Iran's terrorist ring of fire around Israel is now a ring of smoke, smoking ruins. We have crippled Iran's nuclear weapons program. We have weakened the Houthis. We have devastated Hezbollah, and we have destroyed Hamas's political and military leadership. This graphic shows just some of the depraved savages who are now rotting in hell. If you have a chance to be Hamas's next leader, you might want to think twice. This is how we deliver peace through strength. Though good has once again triumphed over evil, we must keep the pressure on to compel Hamas to demilitarize once and for all. As President Trump said this week, if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. Because let's be clear, there can be no lasting peace for Gaza with Hamas sitting at the table. For those who say otherwise, consider that as the rest of the world celebrates the return of the hostages and the ceasefire, Hamas terrorists have been publicly executing members of the opposition in Gaza in a last-ditch effort to hang on to their waning power. This is appalling, but not surprising, given Hamas's track record of using the people of Gaza as pawns to achieve its ultimate aim of eliminating Israel. Time and again, we've seen Hamas use innocent people as human shields and weaponize humanitarian aid by withholding food and supplies from children. These are the sort of vile intimidation tactics that Hamas terrorists have used for decades to remain in power. No more. Today, with our friends in Israel and the Arab world, we have the opportunity to chart a path toward peace and prosperity for the people of Gaza. And while today is a day for rejoicing, let it also serve as a reminder of one of history's timeless lessons. Bad things happen when you lose a war, especially when you started the war. These men can attest to that lesson. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
With people en masse. They actually do not require presidents to cancel projects and raise energy prices. nor do they give presidents new magical powers to destroy programs they don't like or to target political opposition. You don't have to take my word for it, because this is not our first government shutdown. It is just the first time that a president has blatantly and gleefully tried to use a shutdown against the American people. So when President Trump fires hundreds of public health workers at CDC without thinking twice about if it would put lives in jeopardy, that is a choice he is making. When President Trump puts at risk special education programs through mass layoffs, that is a choice he is making to abandon students with disabilities and their families and weaken their access to rights under our special education laws. When Trump outright shutters a key community development fund, which has strong bipartisan support and finances housing and health care and other community projects in our country, that is a choice he is making. President Trump is choosing to fire as many people as he thinks he can get away with, to break as much of the government as is possible, to hurt the American people as much as he can, because he thinks he can use regular people as leverage. That's the cold, hard reality, and it is plain as day. That is why Trump is governing by a principle of maximum pain. It's not because he had to, it is because he wanted to. It is not because he's following any law, it is because he is ignoring countless laws. It's not because he held off on layoffs, it is because he is eager to continue to break our government, bend it to his will, and enrich himself in this process. Mr. President, Trump knows perfectly well, just as my Republican colleagues know, that shutdowns don't give him any new power, and they don't just let him fire people with reckless abandon. After all, Trump was president for the longest shutdown in American history, and guess what? Trump didn't have to fire thousands and thousands of workers when he caused that longest shutdown in history. He didn't get to run roughshod over our laws when he kept the government shut down for over a month. So don't let any Republican tell you he simply had to now. And Mr. President, let me put another obvious falsehood to rest. Leader Thune keeps saying Democrats are, quote, enthralled to the radical left. But here's the thing. We actually are the ones talking to Republican voters, because the majority of Republicans and the overwhelming majority of the American people do not want to see their premiums double, triple, or even quadruple for millions of families. And many Republicans are starting to realize that too. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has made clear she thinks Republicans need to look at how to stop these premium hikes. Just look at the growing chorus of Republican members begging Speaker Johnson to bring them back so we can solve this issue. Clearly, Republicans are feeling the heat. That's why we are suddenly hearing Republican leaders absurdly pretend they've always meant to focus on health care, even if they would never talk about it before. And even if the only thing they are saying right now is, no, 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 we can't do anything on this right now. We can just think about it, possibly talk about it, potentially, maybe do something someday. So House Republicans may not be here in D.C. to talk about this issue with Democrats, but here's the thing. They are still hearing about this back at home. Families are staring down massive premium hikes, and they want Republicans to return and finally work on solutions. Look, the Republican leader can shut down the government if he's really that desperate to avoid addressing the health care crisis Republicans caused, but he cannot shut down the debate, and he cannot shut down the voices of families who are speaking out about how their premiums are about to skyrocket. I've been constantly hearing from folks back home in Washington State. Letters and calls are pouring into my office from families who are worried about how their premiums will double if Republicans refuse to act. A woman called into my office to share that her husband already received notices that their insurance are going to double in cost. A mother whose son has a traumatic brain and spinal cord injury. She called. She's terrified that she has no idea how they're going to afford the care he needs if health care gets more expensive. You know, last week I spoke with a freelancer in Seattle who's worried their monthly payments will increase by $1,300, and a video producer who told me his premiums are going to more than double and be 60% of his mortgage payment. The week before that, I spoke with some small business owners. They have no idea what they're going to do if these tax credits expire and their health care costs go up. Many of them are rethinking whether they can even afford to keep their small businesses, or if they choose to just go for catastrophic coverage instead. One small business owner would see his premiums triple, as his wife told me, and that is simply not affordable. And this is not just happening in Washington State. This healthcare crisis is about to hammer families across the country, in red and blue states alike. In fact, the biggest rate increases are all in red states. And 3/4 of the people who rely on these tax credits are too. So why don't Republicans go home and talk to their constituents? And if the Republican leader doesn't want to sit down with Democrats to work on a solution, how about he sits down and listens to folks back home who are getting notices this month with massive price hikes for their health insurance? If the Republican leader won't sit down with Democrats to save people from losing their health care coverage, how about he sits down with small business owners, since nearly half of the people on the marketplaces are small business owners, employees, or self-employed. If he won't sit down with Democrats to stop premiums from tripling for some families in his state, how about he sits down with farmers, since over a quarter of farmers in this country are covered through the ACA exchanges. Does Leader Thune think that farmers are now the radical left? Does he think small businesses are the radical left? Because that is who is about to get crushed by these higher premiums. That's who's watching this debate and hoping and praying for action. It is unbelievable that the best the Republican leader can offer to families who are worried about their health care crisis is wait, later. That's really out of touch with families and with reality. Rates are being set right now. Massive hikes are being announced right now. Open enrollment is in a few weeks. In fact, by the way, Idaho open enrollment starts today. Today. Every single senator needs to watch what is happening in Idaho today, because folks in Idaho are in for a very rude awakening when they log in today and see the rates for the coming year. And that rude awakening is coming to the rest of the country on November 1st, if Republicans keep refusing to act. So every single senator needs to listen to the families who speak out about these massive rate hikes that are becoming reality. I actually spoke to some Idahoans last week. One retiree told me about how her premiums are going to jump 173%. That is almost triple. You think that's bad? Another retiree I spoke with had learned that with the tax credits, his premium will be $367 a month. Without those tax credits, a whopping $2,232 a month. That's astounding. And yet, if Republicans refuse to act, that is the reality that is going to come crashing down on families across our nation. This is not an end-of-the-year problem, like Speaker Johnson keeps saying. It is a right-now problem. There is a train coming. Families are tied to the tracks. Why on earth would Republican leaders insist on standing by? Why are they twiddling their thumbs? Why do they want to wait until those rates are locked in? And for all the talk of later, why on earth wouldn't Republican leaders work with us earlier on this? This is not some surprise. We've been raising the alarm on this issue for months. Republican leaders just didn't care earlier, and apparently they still don't care now. What a contrast to Republicans' billionaire tax breaks just a few months ago. Republicans were full speed ahead when it came to shoveling money at some of the richest people on the planet. Remember that? Moved heaven and earth. They used magic math. They slashed over $1 trillion in health care for patients and hospitals. They used every trick in the book for billionaires. But now, nothing when it comes to working families. Nothing when it comes to health care. Mr. President, Republicans can either go back home and explain to their own constituents why they think their premiums should double, or they can come to the table where Democrats have been this whole time and work with us to reach a serious deal that reopens the government and responds to this health care crisis. Democrats are not going anywhere. We are staying at the table. Right now, Republican leadership is refusing to take the shutdown or the health care crisis seriously. Speaker Johnson is still refusing to bring his members back from vacation, despite the growing mutiny among Republicans. Leader Thune is still refusing to do anything other than vote on the same failed partisan CR over and over. And President Trump is still creating a government shutdown like his own personal jamboree, tweeting out sombreros and promising to cut, quote, Democratic programs. Let's be clear. Republicans control the White House and both chambers of Congress, and they are basically missing in action when it comes to finding a real solution to reopen the government and save millions of Americans from health care bills that will break the bank. When will President Trump get serious about a solution? When will Speaker Johnson and Leader Thune do their jobs and get to the negotiating table? When will House Republicans end this month-long vacation? Today? Tomorrow? Next week? Mr. President, the American people are waiting. But of course, Republican leadership isn't the end-all be-all, because Republican voters have made they do not want to see their premiums skyrocket. And Republican members in the House and Senate alike are hearing from those families back home who will not let them ignore this and starting to realize we actually do need to address this health care issue now. But Mr. President, the clock is ticking. Rate hikes are going out in the mail. Open enrollment starting today in Idaho. Time is running out. And that message is breaking through. I think even Republican leaders are starting to realize there is no spinning their way out of premiums doubling in our country. If they want to get serious about stopping that and ending this shutdown, all they have to do is say so. Mr. President, our door is open. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.